All right, and on Alex Garrett Podcasting, we have a very exciting weekend upcoming. On this show, we've got to talk about the fact that this ends National Disability Employment Awareness Month. It's a bit of a mouthful to say, but yes, all month long there have been companies, there have been organizations honoring this month. But I figured let's talk about this at the end of October because there are organizations, and those same organizations, who are advocating and placing and making sure people with disabilities are hired into November and beyond. They work nonstop. They work past the awareness month and bring awareness all the time. And one of those groups, most certainly, is the Center for the Independent Disabled New Yorkers, CIDNY. And with me, and I'm proud to say this, is the executive director, Dr. Sharon McLennon-Weir.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this important event for people with disabilities.
And Dr. Sharon, I wanted to know, firstly, your story as the executive director, because obviously, if the audience may not be familiar, you are blind, but you don't let that stop you. But I want to know your story first, and then we can go into what the organization does for people with disabilities.
Sure. So my story is is a long story, but I'm going to make it really quick. At the age of 6, I started losing vision, and by the time I became in my early 20s, I've lost pretty much all of my sight. I am 51 years old now, and I'm a totally blind person. I do not see anything, no light perception, just darkness. So pretty much my whole life I've been living as a blind person and going to school, making friends, learning how to engage in hobbies. The world of work has always been from that perspective. So I'm part of the community. I understand how hard it is to achieve. And what I've learned in my life that if you have a disability, at times it takes you working 2 or 3 times harder to obtain basic things that people without disabilities have. And sometimes the motivation and momentum can wax and wane depending on the obstacles that come in your way. So as the executive director, it's been a long battle to get to this point as leading a disability rights organization. And my goal is really to help other people with disabilities understand their story and understand that they are able to achieve in life, no matter what the level of disability is. If you can engage in a volunteer experience or a part-time job or a full-time job, whatever your story, your lens allows for, you should try to achieve that. And we honor Disability Awareness Month because, unfortunately, people without disabilities bring a lot of preconceived notions, misperceptions, stigma, prejudice against people with disabilities because they think that if you have a disability, you aren't able to do A, B, and C. And we take this month to acknowledge the fact that there are people with disabilities working and many more would like to work. And there could be a lot of obstacles and barriers to working. But the desire to work is present for all people with disabilities as well as for people without disabilities.
I feel like it's sort of in the community an instinct to want to get there. So how do you motivate people to work? It's not that easy to be motivated if you have a disability. So how does CIDNY and how do you personally motivate people? Yeah, you can do this just like anybody else can.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is hard to say, but a lot of it is innate. A lot of it is what psychologists call resilience and motivating principle. So if you're in an environment where you have a disability and you have those around you who have disabilities and you see them engaging in life and doing what they have to do, then you immediately can replicate that and mimic that. So CIDNY serves as that motivator, that agency of change, that role model, that people can come in and see people with disabilities engaging in work. About 60% of our staff have a disability, may be obvious or hidden. And like you said earlier, I'm the executive director, and I'm totally blind, so it's a very obvious disability. So when people come in, service folks, legislators, donors, we are living, breathing the walk and talk of what it's like to live with a disability. And I think it's important for New Yorkers who may not know about CIDNY or other disability-related organizations to find out that information, to get acclimated, get yourself part of the community, to understand that, yes, it's very tough, it's really hard, but there's over 61 million people in the United States that have a documented disability. And post-COVID, we are going to see even more people with disabilities just due to long COVID and the effects of that, and also with the psychological implications of social isolation due to COVID. So it's going to grow.
I know that, and it's going to impact the younger generation too, because obviously everybody's sort of set back in the school system and whatnot. But, you mentioned how it's sort of an innate thing. So when you travel around, on behalf of CIDNY, I'm sure you do conferences and whatnot. What's the energy? I'm sure these different outlets that you speak to, they want to get people back to work too, and the partnerships you have must be very expensive at CIDNY as well.
Yes. The idea of work, I think, is salient for all groups. As the representative of CIDNY, I am fighting for access, inclusion, and universal design in all aspects of New York City. So when we talk about going back to work, we also have to talk about how do we get to work safely, making sure that we have accessible transportation, making sure that the work environments are safe, because, people have been working remotely for the last 2.5 years, and all organizations, including CIDNY, is trying to bring workers back somehow, some way, part-time to the office. So it's important for employers to understand what their cultural framework is, what their employees want, how to keep them safe from better ventilation systems to hygiene and protocol, cleaning, to having separate workstations, having distancing in the offices. The open floor plan is not the typical floor plan anymore in the sense of dealing with the pandemic, understanding that people may need walls around them. You can make them in a cubicle setting as best as you can, but the key point is to have that ventilation, and also to think about a framework of work. Like if you're able to have people work 2 or 3 days remotely and still get the work done in the most efficient manner and still be able to serve your customers and clients, then maybe that's the way you need to go. I think all employers are trying to kind of rethink how the world of work, the landscape should be right now.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the advocacy part, because I know that you guys also have a lot of projects where we have to recognize, as people with disabilities, we also are taxpayers, and you guys recognize that off the bat. And I believe you got this project going where you're going to sort of tell City Hall, hey, here's where we want our resources and our taxpayers, taxpaying dollars to go on behalf of disabled New Yorkers. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so the People Money Project is a great way. I think it's the first time where the mayor's office is actually speaking to the stakeholders, the community, the taxpayers, about how they want their money, this $5 million, to be spent. And CIDNY is part of that initiative, where we are reaching out to a lot of our consumers for them to join in these workshops. They're in person as well as virtual workshops to talk about ideas that affects them, from having all restaurants be accessible to having maybe an app on hotels where they which hotels in New York City are accessible, or being able to go to a restaurant and knowing that if you use a motorized wheelchair, you'll be able to fit into the restroom independently. Because, a lot of these hotels, bars, restaurants have very small bathrooms that, it's challenging for a person without a disability to get into. So, so being able to even go into Central Park and know that there's available porta potty that you can get into and that is, clean and accessible. So this opportunity for New Yorkers to come out and talk about how they want their neighborhood to look different, it's a great opportunity. It's an opportunity, like if there's some type of service that you don't see in your neighborhood, it could be as simple as having street signs, because some neighborhoods, street signs are not replaced, and that's challenging. So maybe your curb cuts are not up to date. They've worn down, or they've been cracked. You can have money spent to refurbish those things. Or maybe you don't have a community center for seniors. And maybe
and can this help fix the elevators? Because having commuted with these are just their elevator service is crappy, right? So is that also in the game plan as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, that CIDNY and as well as other disability rights organizations, we just recently, in June of 2022, signed a settlement with the Metropolitan Transit Authority, MTA, which outlines their 30-year plan to update all stations throughout the system, ensure that stations have elevators in working condition, but also elevators that are actually newly installed, so that people who are unable to use stairs have a way of using the subway, a way of accessing the subway. Yes, 30 years is a very long time. And I know that CIDNY's previous executive director, Susan Duha, and other advocates, fought for the last 5 years to get a better deal. But this is a deal that we have, and it is historic to have in writing that New York City, one of the oldest transit hubs, per se, will one day be accessible to every single user. I mean, that's phenomenal. So we hope that through time, and each year from this year, 2022, moving forward, that we will start to see accessibility being implemented in the New York City subway system.
So I don't mean to say this with any malice, but I feel like sometimes those in the community tend to rely heavily on, just going after businesses that, may not either know or may not, may just need to be educated. And instead they just say, well, you're not doing ADA. My point with this question is, how do you encourage those to live a balanced life as a regular citizen, if you will? Because that's what we want to be. We want to be normalized, right, in society, and at the same time fight for their rights, but not to the point of injuring the average business that may not genuinely know sometimes the ADA, if my question makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a perfect question, and I would say to you that that's another feature of CIDNY that we do. We do a lot of disability literacy and information to organizations and businesses. The first mode of trying to understand the ADA is not to sue. Sometimes there are some small business owners that really don't know, and they have no idea about what ADA is.
What did you get your doctorate in?
Oh, sure. Counseling psychology. So, yes, I am a counseling psychologist, and I went to Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey. I'm also a mental health provider in addition to working at CIDNY. And I work with clients with all different types of psychological issues. And it's important for people to be very aware of their physical health as well as their mental health. I think the pandemic has definitely spotlight mental health and the need for it. and also good mental well-being and just overall wellness. We talk about whatever we put into our bodies, whatever we consume, either from our mouths or from our ears or our eyes, can definitely impact one's overall being. And that's very true about what we read and what we hear and how that can impact our mental health.
And you know what? This COVID thing screwed everybody up, but I'm glad that CIDNY, CIDNY is there. All right, one big thing that I forgot to ask you about that I want to right now before we close up for now, but I'm definitely going to have you back, Dr. Sharon McLennon-Weir, because you are awesome. I love talking to you. And this is our first conversation, but I feel like I've known you for a while. So thank you for, being so open our first conversation. This has been great. But what about the parade? We missed it. We had to have it rescheduled. So what's up with that?
Yeah, well, we're trying to figure that out. I know that there's been some advocates that were trying to pull something together for this Sunday, but it's a little disjointed. I think that the individuals that planned the initial Pride Parade, one of our staff members, Monica, was also on that committee. They worked really hard to try to bring that parade to us, but unfortunately, nature played her or his role in that, and I am sure that we'll have another parade in the near future. I don't know when, but I am sure that the advocates will get together and put something forward. I think what we need to remember is that disability pride is not just in the parade. It's something that we should express every day as we live our lives, living and working in New York City. When you step out of your home, go into whatever appointment you're going to, if you're speaking to someone over a cup of coffee, having dinner, friends, whatever you're doing, you should be proud of who you are. And disability is just one aspect of you. And I would just say to folks, yes, it's a shame that we didn't get to have the parade, but that disability pride is within you every day, and it's not just during parade day.
I always feel like I'm marching to it with work, and I feel like everybody who does that and lives their life the best they can definitely marches to it. All right, one last thing. The newsletter is a big deal. I get it every I feel like weekly. How can others sign up for it and even be part of the town halls that you guys have?
Go to CIDNY, CIDNY.org, and you can sign up and find out all information. You could also email our Director of Communications, and that's J. Peters, P as in Paul, E as in Edward, T as in Tom, E as in Edward, R as in Robert, S as in Sam, at C as in Cat, I as in Indigo, D as in Dog, N as in Nancy, Y as in Yellow.org. So Jay Peters at CIDNY.org is our communications director, and he will make sure that you get either an email copy of our newsletter or a hard copy in the mail.
By the way, Jeff Peters, thank you for arranging this conversation with Dr. McLennon-Weir. You guys are awesome, and I'm going to have you back on. And, of course, as I say, we might be nearing the end of October, but the awareness never stops, and I'd love to have you on next month to see what's going on for the winter for you guys.
Okay, great. Thank you, Al, so much for having me. And, again, I just wanted to say to everyone, please don't feel hopeless. Feel empowered, and CIDNY can help with that. Thank you.
We need that message as we head into the darker times of the year. When it gets dark out, the depression level for some just rises. So that word of encouragement, highly needed for many. And thank you so much for offering that today, Dr. Sharon.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm Alex Garrett, where we're always adapting.